we are going to be talking about the podcast topic of when it is great to be good enough. So I've got a couple of questions to see how much you kind of relate to some of the challenges that sort of always desiring to be great can cause. We've got the matrix, a matrix for us all to sort of see where we sit. And then we've got a few different ideas for action. I found myself in the part of the matrix that I like less. That's all right. Matrices are just there to kind of create clarity and self-awareness. It's the action that's important. Awareness plus action is what we're looking for. So let me get my screen up. Hopefully this will come up with a little tech test before you all joined. Come on screen. There we go. We're here. So the first thing that I wanted to kind of get a little bit of a sense of is I just wanted to get Sarah and I at the start of the podcast this week. We talked about when the sort of desire to make everything great can get in the way of your growth. And I just wanted to sort of put that question to you, really. First of all, I wanted to understand who maybe sometimes feels the weight of great. So we'll start there. And then I wanted to get some insight from you onto when do we think this desire to be great can get in our way. So let's do this one first. Let me know, stars on screen, if you feel that sometimes this sort of weight of great, this need to make everything brilliant, is something that you kind of, I guess that it resonates with you. You see this in yourself. Stars on screen. So everyone who's new, who's like, what is going on right now? The stars on screen you do by going to the top of your Zoom, and then it's view options, and then annotate, and then stamp, and then star. View options, annotate, stamp, and star. Just let's get a bit of a sense of, does it resonate with you? Sarah has put that in chat so you can kind of see the details. Steph said, this resonated with me so much as I sometimes class it as procrastination. Okay. So the sort of the result you see of this pressure is that you procrastinate. That's interesting. Where do we put, this is so not me? Elaine, it's actually not me either, interestingly. So this was more of this is something that I can understand, but I don't directly relate to. I have different challenges, like definitely, you can share some of those. So maybe, Elaine, when we do the matrix, you'll be able to kind of go, this is not me, this is me instead. I love the good enough. Yeah. And you know, there are issues sometimes with making everything good enough as well. It's not that we're saying like people who make things good enough, that's always the right thing. But this weight of great it can create lots of problems. So what we're saying here is that people who feel the weight of great are putting themselves under a lot of pressure to make everything perfect. That's essentially what we're saying, that whether it's a project or a presentation or a conversation, the expectation they put on themselves is that each of those moments needs to be brilliant. And it causes issues. So before I tell you what issues I think it causes, let me ask you, let me get rid of your lovely stars for a second. What do you think is the issue with great? Because I think sometimes it's very easy to self-justify and go, yes, but I want everything to be great and it's better when it's great. So for people that do feel the weight of great, what challenges does that create for you? Head into chat so we can just get a little bit of a sense of what I've got. So let me get my what have we got here? Sam says, I feel it relates to me. One of the things I've been strong enough to discuss is how the length of the meeting determines my energy. That's interesting. I agree. Issue with great is that it can be performative and unrealistic. Yeah, that's interesting, Andrew. Personally, has been driven by a fear of looking stupid in the past. We often see that actually. The one of the confidence gremlins that we talk about, we kind of have this top 10 list of confidence gremlins, is a sort of fear of not being good enough. And often it's the people who have that confidence gremlin of like, I'm not good enough, I don't know enough, that they create the weight of great in their mind. And what's always really interesting is they don't put that expectation on other people. So they don't kind of go, oh, everybody else needs to feel the weight of great, they all need to be amazing all of the time. They're kind of very forgiving over other people going, do you know what, I haven't got the answer to that question. I might come back to you and have a think about it. But for themselves, that weight of great results in them sort of over preparing because they feel like they have to know everything or they're not good enough. So I think it's a really insightful thing that you've done there, Andrew, in connecting sort of a confidence gremlin with this particular problem. Claire, pressure. That's interesting, Corinne. My great is different to someone else's. Yeah, really interesting. We all have this kind of little great filter, and so Sarah and I definitely get into these debates sometimes where I'm like Sarah's idea of great. I'm like, well, I mean, do you want it to go live? That bar is so high. And also it sometimes can be quite difficult for the people to get there. So yeah, Laura's saying the same thing. Got pressure coming up there. That's interesting, Carolina. Things end up being less natural. Yeah, do you lose some of that sort of the ideas and the freedom and the flexibility? There are some connections. We've done podcasts before on sort of high trust teams and psychological safety. If you are a manager or a leader who sort of creates the weight of great in your team, as like a culture, then that can make it less easy for people to experiment, because experiments are all about sort of things not being great. It's about testing, learning, iterating, improving. But if as a manager you're creating a culture where the weight of great is sort of on everybody, then people fear failure or getting it wrong because they think that they have to get it great too. So it's a really interesting, I agree, Caroline, things can be less natural, and that pressure can sort of become what other people feel they have to perform to as well. Exhausting. Do you know, at least honest, striving for the best that I can do in all things is exhausting. Yeah, it does create a lot of anxiety, second guessing, too much time on task. Okay, so it's an issue, right? And I sometimes think people who have this drive could sometimes talk themselves around it, but well, things should be good and it shouldn't go out unless it's perfect, and this reflects on me, so therefore it needs to be brilliant. I hear it a lot, and I think what we are not saying is that nothing that you do should be great. Like, definitely not saying that. There are certain things that you might really want to put your all into. What I am saying is that if that is your approach for everything, it'll be exhausting. You are probably going to hold yourself back. The irony of this is that you're trying to be so great at everything that the risk is that you're not great at anything. That's the risk here. And lots of the things that you are sharing with me, more than I can possibly read, are kind of the reality of this approach. So on the podcast, we talk about a matrix, which I'm going to bring to life, and let's see where we all sit on this matrix. So when we're thinking about this distinction between being what work needs to be good enough and what work could be great, there are sort of two dimensions that we talked about as being important for you to assess yourself on, really. So the first is the extent to which you care about the work that you're doing. So you either have a high level of care, so that means that, you know, this is really important to you, you really want it to do well, this is something you are personally passionate about, that's what we're talking about when we're saying care, or you have a sort of low level of care, not something that you're that interested in, whether it happens or not, you're not really that bothered about. That's kind of the low level of care. And then the other dimension, so you've got this dimension of care, the other dimension is control. And so this thing that you're working on, you either have a high need for control, so you're in the detail, you're the person who does it, and you're the person who delivers on the deadlines, like you want it to be very, very close to you, or you have sort of a low need for control, which is that you find it easier to let it go. You're not necessarily as close to the detail of how it gets done. And where your sort of personal working preference sits in this mixture of care and control influences how you can come across with the work that you are managing and how effective or ineffective that can be. So let's talk about this box down here for a moment, this one down here. So this is where you've got low need for control and you've also got a low care about the thing that you're working on. What we kind of termed this as here is this can come across as you being very detached from the work that you're doing. So you're letting it go very easily. And the risk with being too detached from your work is really like reputational, because, you know, other people might identify you with this particular project you're working on, but you've just let it go on because you've got a low need for control and low care about the project. And who knows what's going to happen next. And that thing could get bigger and better, or it could become a barrier and a blocker for the business, but you don't know. So having a low level of care and a low level of control for lots of the work that you do is a bit of a risk for your reputation. Now, I can sometimes fall into this box, and it's more because I have a desire to do so much that I let things go very easily. So I might start something off. I might be like, okay, here's an idea, would love to move this forward, can you take it on? And I will just let it go without a lot of control. My assumption is someone else is going to pick it up, that person's going to be better and more passionate about it than me. So I'm like, here you go, off you go. And it isn't because I want to be detached, it is because I'm trying to do too much. So I think it is interesting, because if you have too much of your time in this box, you are creating more of a risk to your reputation, is the kind of little flag here. Now let's go to this one down here. So this is where you have a high need for control, but a low sort of level of care in terms of what you're working on. And what this can come across as is you're being really territorial about your work. So it might sound like, well, I need to do it because it's my job. Like, do I want to do it? No. Do I really care about it? No, but I need to do it because it's my job. And the reality is there might be people in your team who are more passionate about this thing than you. Like, they might be really interested in it. It could be a development opportunity for them. They might do it better than you too. Very likely that there are people in your team that can do this thing that's better than you. And so when you are territorial about your job, you might be doing work that doesn't really energize or engage you and holding the business back because other people could do it better than you. So we just really want to have a little flag here about, well, how often do I end up saying or thinking, well, I need to do this because it's my job to do, versus what's in my job that I am best to do, and what areas could someone else improve? And that's those sort of questions demonstrate more care, because it's less about you and it's more about the work. And what we're often trying to do here is think about, well, what results in the best work? Not like, what am I working on and how do I come across as my best, but what results in the best work? Next one up here. So we'll do this in, what color should we do this in? We'll do it in orange. This is where you have a high care over your work. So you're passionate about it, you want it to do well, it's really important to you personally, and you also have a very high need for control. So you want to stick to it like glue. Now, the issue here is that you can get over attached to your work. So I am almost identifying with it. Like, this is not just a project, this is my project, and I want it to do well. And I believe that the only way it can be done well is if I control all of it. And this can be really, really off-putting for other people, because you're not really letting them input or improve. You can become quite a bottleneck. Like, if this is how you are approaching lots of the work that you do, this can be quite a bottleneck for like moving things forward, because you just keep going, well, I'll do it and I'll do it my way, and I think my way is the best way. This, I fall sometimes more into territorial and detached. I can see that sometimes I go into those two boxes. Sarah is much more in the over attached box. And it sounds like when she's talking to me, right, if let's say we're working an article, she'll say to me, I've spent lots of time on this. I've spent hours on it now, Helen, and it's ready for you to just give it a look over. And I'll be like, I may want to do more than just look this over, but you haven't really given me the permission to do that. And so again, no one's trying to be deliberately difficult. It's just because you've probably over-identified with the work that you've done, and you've got this high need for control. You're not letting other people input, improve, or get involved in it. Creates pressure for you. It's quite off-putting for other people. So what we are trying to get to, and then I'm going to catch up with all of your comments and questions that I can see are going up, is this zone over here. This is the open zone. This is the zone of when it is good enough. This is where we have a high level of care about the work that we're doing. But it is about the work. So we are recognizing that the work could be done better if somebody else contributed. And so we are willing to have a lower level of control to be able to let that thing go, because we know that it will grow better if we do it. And this open zone for some of our work is the zone of good enough. It's recognizing when is it okay for me to get it good enough, and then to let it go so it can grow, because someone can probably build on it better than I can at this point in time. And like I say, not all of our work we need to have a good enough approach to, but some of it we do. Some of it we are going to get it good enough, and then someone else is going to take it forward and make it better. And that makes stronger teams. It means that we benefit from more of the insights, experience, and strengths that people bring. And it means that we're just more collaborative in the way that we work. So let me know with a star on my screen where you think that you spend all of your time, but which of these zones do you identify with? So you might identify with more than one zone. Like I said, on a bad day, territorial, it's my job, I've just got to get it done, and a bit detached. I'm doing so much, I've just got to let it go. So maybe like, be a little bit of sort of self-critical, self-aware. Where do you think which of these zones do you see yourself in? Where do you see yourself in? So most I'd say the majority, this is non-scientific, everyone, because I can't count your stars and I can't evaluate percentages based on how many people are here. Lots of people here today. That's interesting. 143 people here. So it's obviously a topic that resonates with people. So most is falling into that top left box of attached over here. So where that pressure of sort of making things great sort of gets in the way. Some other people in that territorial and detached, and lots of people saying open, which is good. Like I definitely spend some of my time in open, but I also do see when I fall into those bottom two boxes. Let's have a little catch up with some of your comments before we get into ideas for action. Will says, I fluctuate on the metrics depending on which team is doing the work and the capability of the leader and team, which is all good, Will, and it's honest, but we just maybe need to be aware of assumptions we might be making about people's capability, I suppose, if that's what we're doing. Like, are we giving people the opportunity to challenge the assumptions that we're making? Zone of goodness sounds very healthy. What else have we got? Got me thinking about my team. Yeah. Challenge for me comes up when I want to work collaborative, and other people might be attached or territorial. Yeah, Onyeka, that's interesting, isn't it? Does feedback come into this too? You know, when you see these behaviors in other people, how do we give them feedback on that? As a positive negative to the open quadrant, is there a risk that you can use other people's opinion as a form of procrastination? I see that in myself sometimes. Maybe. Steve, I think I'd have to think a bit more deeply about that one. It depends on what I'm working on. Okay, so it depends on who I'm working with and what I'm working on, seems to be some of the comments that we're having. Okay, so let's move on to some ideas for action that we talk about on the podcast. Let's have a look. So the first thing we talked about is stop and share. This is you putting a date or a deadline in the way of your work, okay? But in a really constructive way. So it could be I am going to stop at 3 o'clock and hand that work over to ... whoever that person is. Or it could be on, the 14th of the month. This is the point in time at which I'm going to, move this project on to someone else to work on. And it's having these particular dates. Sarah and I do this a lot with our articles. I think, a lot of people have said it depends what you're working on. I agree. When Sarah and I are working together, there are some projects where our different approaches could cause friction. I think that writing is often the one that does for Sarah and I. So whether we are writing a Harvard Business Review article or whether we are writing a book, I see the difference between Sarah's great attachment and my good enough, sometimes detachment. That's when I see the biggest sort of friction. And so what we have now worked on, so Sarah will try and control more and more and more. And I will just be like, I'll get even more defensive about we just let it go, Sarah, like time to move on. And so what we have started to do is this stop and share point. So Sarah will be like, right, I'm going to work on it till 3 o'clock and then I'm going to send it over to you. And I'll be like, brilliant, I've got an hour to work on it and I'll get it back to you. And so we do a lot of this stop and share, but it's very, very specific. The date we're going to do it, the time, and that has allowed us to feel more comfortable about when we're getting it and when you need to let go of it, and when someone needs to get it back. So that has worked really, really well for us. What's Janelle saying? Stop and share is brilliant. I did it yesterday. The relief was good. Just saying I did my bit for as long as I needed. Yeah, it's really, we have found it really, really helpful. And so what we have had is almost like we do a bit of this between us. So we do, okay, I'm going to do 2 hours and then I'm going to get it back to you. This is my deadline to get it back to you. And then we do that for a little while, but then we hold ourselves to a date that needs to go to somebody else. So it needs to go to our publishers. Because it needs to go to our publishers on the 14th and we've got 10 hours between us to work it on, this is when we're going to stop and share. Has been super, super helpful for us, made us much less friction. It's just much more clarity about it. C Parker 5 says, I don't have the opportunity to do this. It's a high level of accountability in my role. Therefore, I share for input, but I cannot stop anything or let go of meaning. I have to remain attached in the matrix. Without knowing you and the work that you do, it's really hard for me to comment. All I would say is that sometimes we make assumptions about how we need to do our work because of the way that we're working today. And whenever I'm coaching anyone, whenever I hear an assumption, like I don't have the opportunity to do this, and it could be about this or something else, I'll always hold that kind of assumption up and sort of treat it, because what you're effectively creating there is a career constraint for yourself. And I would like to challenge that career constraint. So we often use if then. So if ... what would need to be different in this situation for you to do that? So if ... was different, then what could you do differently? Just be aware. It's hard for me to talk to you because I don't know your context entirely. But just be aware, assumptive statements that create constraints for our careers can be unhelpful. And so holding the assumptions that we make up, like, I can never be an accountant because I'm not good at maths. Okay, well, if then, what could that look like for you? Are often ways that we don't reduce our opportunities for ourselves. Second thing we talk about is project on a page. Really good way of getting to like an MVP, like a minimum viable product. Because when you've got a real great mindset, you can sometimes over plan, over prepare, overthink what this needs to be. I see this a lot. And so project on a page is a really simple way of articulating, well, what is good enough? In corporate land, I would call this a straw man. Does anyone use that language? Like, what's our straw man? That would have been like how we would have talked about it. So we have different templates for project on a page, and amazing if we do find it a really useful way of getting things started so that great doesn't get in the way of something getting started. Couple of things that you might want to have on a project on a page. What are we actually trying to achieve? Like, in its simplest, and like making this 1 or 2 sentences is really important. Like, it's not like a super lengthy document. It is simple, specific. So what are we trying to achieve? Why is this actually beneficial for the business? Because sometimes you might start things off, it's like, well, why is this actually important? What are we going to get from doing this? Who needs to be involved? Because that helps you to not over involve, because that can over complicate things. How can we approach it? So maybe some sort of different we could pilot, prototype, pitch something, those sort of approaches. What does that look like? And when are the key dates and deadlines? This is not completely, this is not all the only things that you might put on a project and page, but I do think those sort of open who, how, when, where, why types of questions are quite useful to frame this. My prompt for you would be just make the answers simple, like 1 or 2 sentences. We just be aware, particularly if you've got that desire for greatness, that this doesn't turn into a thesis. Like, we're not trying to create a dissertation about what we're going to do. We're trying to put a project on a page. Let me catch up with what you're saying. The first question on what we're trying to achieve is great. It is, but I just do like one little red flag, because every time Sarah and I was talking about this, I was like, I know where you might take this. So Sarah would say that the problem statement is the most important thing. When you're on a project, like, what is the problem we're trying to solve is like the most important thing. Now, I agree that the problem statement is important, but because Sarah's desire to be great is so strong, we could spend 2 weeks debating the problem statement. So the what are we trying to achieve thing is a really important question. Like, what's the problem we're trying to solve? But again, maybe a stop point. Like, again, we're gonna talk this through for 10 minutes and then we're gonna move on, is important, rather, so you're not going round and round and round. Project on a page, progress is what we're trying to prioritize here. Also, check-ins, quite useful. We found this useful. So when someone is leading a project, particularly someone who has a tendency to be over-attached, pre-agreeing when the check-in points are. So if Sarah and I didn't pre-agree stuff, what would often happen is Sarah would work on it and work on it and work on it, and she would hand it over to me to look at when it's 90% there. Not helpful for her, not helpful for me, not giving me a lot of permission, actually could be quite a lot of rework if I don't agree with it. So what is, I think, more effective is when you are picking up a project, particularly if you identify with the kind of attached way of working, pre-agree check-in points. This is checking in, not checking up. So you might say, okay, I'm going to get the project 25% there, and then I'd love to have a kind of a time to kind of pause and review what it's looking like with you. And then what we're going to do is have a team meeting discussion where we're going to do a challenge and build when I'm sort of feeling like I'm halfway there. And then what I'd love to do is kind of hand it over to you at 75% for you to just spend a bit of time with fresh eyes on it. And these sort of check-in points are really, really useful to talk through with somebody, and also just to make sure they're aligned. So I know, for example, with Sarah, that I can be quite detached from some things she might be working on because I'm confident that these points in times have been pre-agreed, and so I know when it's coming back to me. What's this? POAP, project on, POAP, back to POAPs, another acronym. Do we need another acronym? A POAP. Who knows? So check-ins can be useful. And then last but not least, better because. I think if you have a tendency to want everything to be great, it is really useful to reflect on some of the work that you have done and think about how, as a result of me taking this good enough approach, why was that better because of that? Because you will find it really easy to go, well, it'd be better if I just held on to it, like, because I think I could do this. So looking back at work that you've taken this good enough approach with and just thinking, why is it better because? So for example, we write for HBR, we always take this sort of approach. We're very conscious about the checking in points, the stop and share. And when Sarah and I reflect on, oh, that particular chapter of that book was better because we created a new model and we had time to talk about it together. The fact that it reduced the amount of rework that needed to be done between us, like really thinking, why is this better? Because it gives you the confidence to take this approach again in the future. That's what we're looking for here. So you don't fall back into the trap of putting all this great pressure on yourself. Really interesting, Reg. I found surprising that 90% was okay for most of the clients. Yeah, really interesting. most people like talking about when do you want to check in on this project is really interesting, because you often make assumptions about when people might want to do it, and a client might be like, I don't know, 70% went through is fine for me. Okay, right. Nita needs to go to the next meeting. We all need to move on with our days. I hope that has been helpful. The summary of that matrix with a bit more detail is in the pod sheet, which is on our website, amazingif.com. And I think a video might go live on social later. So if you found this useful, maybe share that with other people if you think it could be useful in company, on social, whatever you think would be useful for people. But we are not alone with creating this pressure for ourselves. The more people we can help, the better for everybody. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much for us, so many people being here today. Thank you for people coming back, like Ting, nice to see you again. And we'll be back with you again next week for another Pod Plus. Take care, everybody. Speak to you again soon.